one thing that we speak about a lot is the fact that what many people perceive as pirates, your Hollywood Johnny Depp swashbuckling pirate, and a lot of people, when I tell them that we're doing this podcast, they assume Somali pirates. But we know there's many, many different types of pirate. I think it'd be really interesting to you to share what you know with all of our listeners that they might not understand and know about pirates.
Well, they're not represented. The negativity that has been flowing since somewhere in the 18th century is 90% false. The 90% of false is tacked onto the 10% of truth and makes it 100% pirates are bad news. Since the 50s and the first pirate films, Errol Flynn, etc., pirates have been portrayed as two things. One, adventure, and two, negativity. And I think the negativity has to be in there because of the authoritarian system we all live in the world. Because pirates break the rules. And that's not a good thing for those who govern us and those who control our minds. So, yes, they're portrayed as adventurers and explorers and all this kind of stuff, which attracts the audience. But in the end, the audience must go away from the cinema or the telly thinking, well, pirates are bad guys. But they're not. There are some who are a little bit bad or a little bit more bad than others. And there are some that are totally wonderful and of great benefit to planet Earth. If you look at the Sulu pirates who maintain control of the Celebes Sea, which is between the Philippines and Borneo, and that Malaysia, all that area there they control, these guys literally worship the sea. Anything that is detrimental to the sea, they're going to attack that problem. They work on a barter system, and their barter system has been for hundreds of years. You know, like I give you a sack of rice and you give me a case of beer. And then about 25, 30 years ago, this barter system was closed down by the Brunei, Malaysian and Philippine governments. And they decided to not be so nice. So they would attack a few ships. But even then, the ships they attacked, for example, I took part in the logistics of an attack on a ship in the Celebes Sea that was promoted by the Sulu pirates. This ship was traveling from Indonesia to Hong Kong. Every 2 or 3 weeks, it would be on the voyage, year in, year out, a little small tanker. Because what it took from Indonesia to Hong Kong and what it brought from Hong Kong to Indonesia were different oils and different loads. Each time they had to wash. It's legal that you have to wash the tanks. So he's going to Hong Kong. He washes his tanks in the Celebes Sea. This leaves oil slicks and chemicals all over the place. And because it's a relatively calm sea, these oils really spread out. They're not exactly visible to the naked eye, but they're there like a tiny film on top of the sea. Well, the Sulu pirates complained about this and they stopped the ship and they said, you don't do this here anymore. This is a warning. But they carried on. The following month, they did it again. So they arrived on my island, which my island was in Samar in the Philippines. And it was a pirate base called the Flying Dog. We operated under a political umbrella, so we were really safe there. They came and we had a meeting. We had a meeting with Korean pirates, Taiwanese pirates, Philippine pirates, and Sulu pirates. My part in the operation was the logistics, the planning. So off they went, they stopped the ship. It was a Muslim ship from Indonesia and it was full of whiskey and beer. They took that away. They took all the gold chains and rings and everything of value off the crew. They took the small amount of money that was in the ship safe, and they said, "No, you have got away lightly. Do it again. You're in big." The ship, they then came back to base, and what they had collected, more or less, paid for the operation. You know, there was no profit gain, there was no loss. That was a good thing to do. We've done it. You know, goodbye. When the Indonesian tanker got back to Indonesia, of course, there's television. Oh, we were hijacked by pirates, and they did this to us, and they did that to us. You know, all we did was take away. They've taken away all our gold, or our rings. They never mentioned the beer or the whiskey and cigarettes. And that was organized and operated basically by the Sulu pirates. And not for profit, but to stop a polluting ship polluting their sea. I've been down to their area of operation. I've met them, I've met the chief. And I have to say they're really incredibly wonderful people. I presented them with a pirate flag, and they presented me with 3 little tiny shells that if you looked at them, they would be worthless from Brighton Beach or something. But to the super pirates, these shells were very, very significant. They operate in very long canoes with 22 guys in the canoe, and the captain always standing up at the bow, never sitting down. He never looks around at the crew. He always looks forward, and he operates the craft by using his fingers. And all the crew are watching his fingers down by his side. And as he moves his fingers, that's the order of what they've got to do. And the most intriguing method they use, as far as I'm concerned, is invisibility. They are capable of traveling at a speed, at a slant, with the wave, that they are invisible, and suddenly they appear and it's too late. And that's their wonderful trick of attack.
I love that. That's like where we were speaking about with the episode, obviously, where we speak about the Sperm Beach and how your knowledge of the sea and being one with the sea. And I think that's what came through there. And you speaking about the Sulu pirates is that love and that oneness with the sea. And there's something that you told me before about how pirates were actually involved in the creation of many countries.
If the listener can go back to the Viking Age and imagine the Vikings landing on their rowboats, landing, I don't know, off Harwich or Suffolk somewhere, and pillaging the villages. And then they would sail off, and a month, 5, 6 weeks later, they come back to the same village and pillage again. Now, these villages had no gold, no silver, no riches, nothing. So, let's ask ourselves, why did these Vikings come back to the same village that they'd pillaged a month earlier? Well, let me tell you why. Because of one thing: cheese. There was no cheese in Sweden, Scandinavia. They didn't know about cheese. So when they attacked, they found this cheese. So they knew it took the inhabitants 2 or 3 months or a month to make more cheese. So they would come back for more cheese. Slowly, after a long time, the Vikings morphed into what is known as Varangans. They were still Vikings, but now they'd changed from pillaging to trading. Their original logic remained, but how they went about life was now trading. They knew that it was a lot easier to exist trading than pillaging and perhaps even dying. So the Varangans set up quite an empire. It was based in Gotland, where, strangely enough, is where I learned my trade. That's just a coincidence. And all of the Baltic and the North Sea areas were in their hands. And they traded all the way down from the Baltic, down the rivers, through the Dnieper, into the Black Sea, and traded with the Muslim Empire from there. what we see today as Ukraine, Bulgaria, Moldova, as separate countries, in those times were little tiny princedoms, so many of them, and they were continually fighting. So this blocked the trade route from the Baltic to the Black Sea. There was a guy, a Varangian Viking, called Rurik, and Rurik was at that time working Holland. He had captured the biggest cheese producer probably in the world, and he was producing cheese, sending it to Scandinavia. He was called upon to take a dozen ships all the way down Spain into the Mediterranean to the Dnieper River to sort out the problems of these princedoms that were continually fighting and blocking the trade route. On his way through Spain, he ravaged Spain, and that was to get food. He did the same in Sicily and the same in Greece. And eventually he got into the Black Sea and up the Dnieper. And very, very quickly, he sorted the problem. And peace reigned, and the trade routes could reopen. Now, in his 9 ships that arrived, he had something like 60 to 70, and they called them rowers. They were his rowers. The word for rowers is Rus, R-U-S. And because his rowers and Rurik had sorted the problem of the princedoms out, they were given an area slightly north on the Dnieper River to make their own settlement. They did, and they called the settlement Kiev, which is now an enormous city that was founded by Rurik. His statue is in the main square, and his men, the rowers, the Rus, which just means rowers.
There were some others you told me. So let's say New York. That has some pirate origins as well to it, doesn't it?
Well, I'm really happy you asked me that, James, because quite honestly, this is one of my favorite stories. The British Empire was run, and the cogs of it were organized by what was known as the East India Company. And they were evil. There's no other word. They were just evil. They created the riches for the British Empire. And most of that came from being the biggest heroin pushers of the world. They owned 98% of the world's opium and heroin, and wanted more. The Dutch, on the other hand, the Dutch East India Company, they were into spices. And one of the spices, which was worth in those days more than gold, was nutmeg. And nutmeg was produced on one island in Indonesia, the only island in the world with nutmeg trees. So the East India Company, during the Dutch-British War, managed to do a deal with a guy from Kent, and his name was Nathaniel Courthope. This guy did a deal with the British East India Company to take the island of Run, where the nutmeg was made. It was called the island of Run, R-U-N, and hold it. And he held the island for more than 1,000 days. His 24 men were now down to 5, and himself. And finally, after about 3 years plus, the Dutch killed him. Very unfortunately for him, very shortly afterwards, the British-Dutch war came to an end, and they signed the treaty. And in the treaty, as in all treaties, this is yours, this is ours, you can have that, we've got this. The island of Run, because Nathaniel Courthope had held it for over 1,000 days, was classed as British. Well, the Dutch, they couldn't have that. They couldn't accept it at all, and there was no way out. And they wouldn't sign the treaty until they came to an idea where they annexed onto the treaty If the British allow the Dutch to keep the island of Rum, the Dutch will give the British another island, which they did and they accepted. And the other island was called Manhattan, New Amsterdam, which today is New York. And New York owes its existence to this one pirate guy called Nathaniel Courthope.
Why do you think it is that more people wouldn't know that history, that wouldn't be shared around?
Well, as I say, there are so many. Most pirates, including myself in a very tiny way, have changed the world somehow. In our own case, we have Drake, don't we? Sir Francis Drake. He was a wonderful friend of Queen Elizabeth, and he saved our country, didn't he, from the Armada. His best friend was Walter Raleigh. He was a pirate. And he too became very friendly with Queen Elizabeth I. I think she had a thing for pirates. And let's face it, what did he do? He brought tobacco. And because of him, Tobacco Road started. And that, in one way or another, for good or for bad, changed the world. At the same time, he wasn't finished there. He brought us the potato. And not only did he bring the potato, but because he didn't want, or the Queen didn't want, our European enemies to know about the potato, he planted it in Ireland. So he changed Ireland. Everyone talks about female pirates, and they all talk about Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Well, okay, they were great, but there have been hundreds of female pirates, and the most outstanding of them all was Qing Shi. She has another name, which is Zheng Tichao, but she's commonly known as Qing Shi. She commanded 17,000 men. She commanded over 1,000 ships, each with a captain, or some of the ships were just tiny ones, but they still had a captain. And her method of organization of these ships was incredible. There wasn't a telephone, there is no internet or email. How on earth did this lady control 1,000 captains, over an area of thousands of kilometers? That was perhaps the most intriguing thing that I ever thought about and eventually understood. But here again, the East India Company were selling their opium, heroin into China, and China didn't like it. So we had what is known as the British-Chinese War. The Brits brought in a brand new ship called the Nemesis. It was made of iron and puffed smoke from a steam engine and had two big wheels either side. And it arrived off Canton and caused complete havoc. It was called by the Chinese Devil Ship. It caused the Chinese to surrender. Qing Shi, who was now quite old, asked her son to attack. They attacked the Nemesis. After the Chinese had tried by any way, everything they threw at the Nemesis bounced off because it was made of iron. Qing Shi and her son organized an attack with bamboo into the paddles of the ship and eventually got the bamboo in there and broke all the paddles so the ship could move. And at that point, the Chinese came back and okay, we know that it's possible to kill off this ship, and their enthusiasm came back. So the treaty that was being signed at the time, which the British asked for Canton, couldn't go through, and in compense, the Chinese said, okay, we'll let you have the island of Hong Kong, which was useless. There was only a few peasants on it. There was nothing there at all at the time, on a 99-year lease. So the British didn't get to take Canton because of this attack by a pirate and her son. basically her son, but the idea from the mum. And that was Qing Shi, most incredible woman. And therefore, Hong Kong was born.